continent celebrates 54 years since the establishment of the Organization of African Unity. It's celebrated annually on the 25th of May within the African continent to mark the formation of the OAU in 1963, the precursor to the African Union, as well as chart the progress made by the continent since then to advance democracy, peace, stability and socio-economic development. Well, to chat some more on the significance of the day and the achievements and challenges that still face Africans is Professor Vusi Gumede from the Thabo Mbeki Leadership Institute. Good afternoon, Prof. Welcome again to the SABC News Desk.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone.
Prof, are we facing a crisis in leadership on the continent, or is that being alarmist right now? How pressing is the need for greater caliber leadership? I mean, we do have as a continent an honor roll of luminaries, Oliver Tambo, global peace icon Nelson Mandela, Botswana's first president Seretse Khama all come to mind. But we've also seen a very unhealthy pattern emerging where presidents cling on to power, their term expires, and then ruling parties have difficulty when it comes to accepting legitimate opposition.
Well, indeed, there is a challenge of leadership in the continent, as many have said, what they call leadership deficit, or some call it ideological deficit. So for many years, it seemed the continent was moving forward. So if you take from 1963, when the OAU, the Organization for African Unity, was formed, the first 20 years, arguably, you got a lot of traction, advancement of well-being, but also leaders that were really serious about development of the continent. But I think there were many years that sort of went without really much advancement of well-being. Some call this lost decades. But if you think about from the transition from the OAU to the African Union in 2002 thereabout, you got a sense there was a lot of movement forward again. So we had leaders who were really serious, who were effective, arguably. But it seems again we've lost traction. So if you think about maybe say about 10 years ago up to this point, we seem to be losing ground again. So there is indeed a serious challenge of leadership in the continent, but it's linked to many other issues. It's a global problem. Some of us argue that there's generally challenge of leadership globally. Many of the problems that we see about the global economy and such have to do with the leadership problem across the world. But of course, here in the continent, we've got our own specific challenges, as you said, leaders, not letting go of power, something that needs to change, something that needs to be addressed, particularly by the African Union Commission.
On that note, one such example would be the AU facing very strong resistance, for example, from Burundi's Pierre Nkurunziza, where we saw him take an unconstitutional third term in office. Now, if the African Union cannot efficiently and timelessly send forces or deploy troops in a member nation, what is the likelihood of deploying against non-state actors like Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab, who are still terrorizing innocents in parts of the continent right now?
Well, incidentally, we're discussing these challenges, these issues. We just came out of a conference. This is the 7th one. The African Unity for Renaissance Conference that we host every year. It started 7 years ago, and is followed by the Africa Day lecture, which will take place tomorrow, given by Mahmoud Mamdane, that I'm sure many people know about. And the issue really is that we do need to mold, we need to mentor, we need to train new leaders, and many institutions are trying to do that, including our own. Because without effective leadership, really, we can't go very far. But it does mean that you need political will as well, but not only political will, but also the people need to be more conscious, need to hold governments accountable, need to hold leaders accountable. So if the leadership itself is unable to make the changes that are necessary, we as a people, we must be able to hold them accountable.
On the point of extremism, which we heard President Jacob Zuma bring up in his keynote address this morning, we saw such strong European solidarity in the aftermath, for example, of the terror attack, 3.7 million on the march. But in Africa, we have scores killed, raped, terrorized every day. Why this glaring absence or lack of global solidarity or continental solidarity when it comes to protecting human rights right here in Africa? Where does this lack of empathy, if you want to call it that, stem from? Could it be coming from a lack of a shared African identity, perhaps?
Well, maybe that's one of the issues, but I do think that generally there's a lack of consciousness. Some of us call this critical consciousness and thought liberation, that as a people in Africa have gone through these many difficult phases of enslavement, slave trade, colonialism, colonization, imperialism, and so forth, and that we need to liberate our thoughts, our minds, what others call it decolonization of the mind, that until we reach that stage that we can be more critically conscious, we will not be able to address most of the issues. So there is that issue, but also the issue of identity, as you put it. Our identity has been tampered with, again, by our ugly history, encounters with colonialism and enslavement and so forth. And these, of course, have impacted on us. So a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we liberate our thoughts, we liberate our minds. And that also you need thought leadership also from a very low level, that we do need people in the non-governmental sector, not just only to rely on governments, that we can mobilize from below for change. But the issue of terrorism, I think, needs to be put in context, because it originates somewhere and it gets escalated by other means, or by, I will argue, external interference with the affairs of the continent. So we know, for instance, what happened regarding Libya, that when our leaders in Africa at that point in time seemed they were trying to do something about that challenge, they were overtaken by NATO and others, and we end up with a very big problem, which has actually exacerbated the challenge of terrorism within the continent.
Professor, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We are out of time. That was Professor Vusi Gumede from the Thabo Mbeki Institute of Leadership, joining us from our Pretoria studios.